Hello children. So let's finish up with the last part of the topic, that is anatomy of eye. So we know that we have senses that is found throughout our body. Now these senses, what do? They respond to stimuli. Right? In the environment. So where is this stimuli? It comes from the environment. Now each sense have a specific sense organ, correct? And these sense organ have specific receptor cells. So what is the role of these receptor cells? Is to register this stimuli, right? From the environment it will register the stimuli and it will provide the other parts of the body with the information about this stimuli, right? So today's our special sense organ is eyes. So eyes also have special receptors and those are called as photoreceptors. So therefore eyes are also sometimes called as photoreceptors. So let's look at the different parts of the eyes. Here. Now the first and foremost thing that we understand by looking at the eye is where is this eye located. So let's talk about the location of the eye. So eye is located in a deep protective bony cavities. Okay, so we have a pair of eyes and they are located in a deep protective bony cavities. Okay, and those are called as the orbits or sockets. So that is where the eye is located. Now when you look at the eye, the first and the outermost thing that you happen to look at is the eyelid. Okay, now eyelid is also scientifically called as palpebrae. So basically we know that this eyelid it helps us to blink our eyes, right? The role of the eyelid is that it covers the eyes and it is blinking the eye. So what is the purpose of blinking the eye? Now the blinking is very important. Why? Because it prevents the drying of the eye. Right? It prevents drying of the eye. How? By distributing the fluid. By distributing fluid over the entire region of the eye. Right? So that is how it prevents drying. Also the eyelid acts as a shade. It acts as a shade or it acts as a cover. It protects the eye, right, from the perspiration entering into the eye or the dust particle entering into the eye. So that's the eyelid. Now let's jump into the different parts of the eye, outer side as well as the interior parts of the eye. Okay, now the different parts of the eye is divided into three main layers. Okay, these are the three main layers. That is fibrous tunic. You know, the tunic or the layer it is called as vascular tunic, that is the middle layer. And then you have the innermost layer of the eye, that is the pigmented layer or the neural layer, which is the retina. Okay, it mainly comprises of retina. So let's look at the first most layer, that is the fibrous tunic, and that consists of sclera and cornea. Okay. Now, this sclera is opaque white. Okay. What is the sclera? It is opaque white. Okay, and it is the outermost covering of, and it is composed of dense connective tissue. Okay, so it is made up of dense connective tissue. So that is the sclera, right? You can see here. Let me just rub this over here. Here. Can you see here? This is the sclera and this is the layer that I'm talking about. So, okay, the inner layer. This one. So, it's made up of dense connective tissue. Right? So, what does it do? It maintains the shape, right? It protects the internal structure. And it also provides the muscle attachment point, and it is continuous with cornea. So you can see this sclera is now continuing further, but it is now as in the bulged part, right? So now this has become the bulged part of the sclera. So this bulged part of the sclera is called as the cornea. Okay, it forms the anterior part of the eyes and it is 1/6 of the fibrous coat, right? So how much is the cornea? It is 1/6 of the fibrous layer. Okay, and it is composed of also connective tissues. Okay, externally it has the stratified non-keratinized squamous epithelium, and internally it has the simple squamous epithelium. Okay, now this cornea, it does not have any blood vessels. Okay, it's a very thin transparent membrane, right? And it does not have any blood vessels, but it has rich in nerve endings. Okay, so it is rich in nerve endings. Now because this cornea does not have blood vessels, the cornea transplant becomes very easy. Okay, in fact it was the first ever transplant that was done by the humans. Okay, so it is never ever rejected, because whenever there is a transplant being done, from one person to another person, right? That's the transplant. You take the organ from one person and you put it into the other person. So the basic question is always there is of the acceptance, right? The other person's body needs to accept that particular organ. So now because this cornea does not have any blood supply, therefore it is never rejected. So it is very easy to undergo a cornea transplant. Okay. So what does it do? Basically, it allows the light to enter into the eye and it refracts the light. So when the light enters the eye, the first region that it meets is the cornea. Now just above the cornea, you will see a very thin transparent membrane that is there, and that is the conjunctiva. Okay, so it is covering this cornea, or you can say the sclera, and it is present inside of the eyelids, right? So it is the thin mucous membrane, right? Or inner surface. It is covering the inner surface of the eyelids, and it is right at the front, so the anterior side of the eyeball, right? So what is the role of this conjunctiva? It actually protects the cornea. You see, cornea is very, very important. So there is a protection given for cornea. So how does it actually protects it? It secretes oils, okay, and mucus. So this conjunctiva, it secretes oils and mucus. Okay, and this will moisten and lubricate the eye. So that's the role of conjunctiva. Let's come to the vascular middle layer. Now the first layer that you will come across is the choroid. Okay. Now choroid is a pigmented layer and it contains the melanin. Right? It contains melanin. So just beneath the sclera you have the choroid. Okay, and it has a lot of blood vessels. And it also nourishes the retina. So that is the inner layer. So what is the role of choroid? It will nourish the retina. That means it will supply it with oxygen and nutrients. Okay, and it looks bluish in color. Okay, now this choroid, it becomes thickened at one point. Okay, so the anterior part, in the anterior part, this choroid becomes thickened. Okay, and then it forms the ciliary body. Okay, here you can see this is the choroid, right? This one, and at the anterior part it has become thickened, and this is the ciliary body. And this ciliary body, you can see it is on both the sides, right? So you can see that it is holding the lens in position, right, with the help of those ligaments there. So it is holding the lens in position. Okay, so we now come to the next part of the middle layer, that is the iris. Okay, so beneath the cornea you have the iris layer. Okay, now what is this role of the iris? That iris is actually, you know, it is the visible colored portion of the eye. Okay, you can see that the eye is something in brown in color, so that's the iris layer. Okay, so it is a pigmented circle. Okay, and that is attached to the ciliary body in front of the lens, which you can clearly see over here. Okay, so it is right in front of the lens and it is also attached to the ciliary body. Correct? And now just inner to the iris, it is like, you know, it is perforated in the middle over here, and it has the pupil. Okay, so this is the pupil over here, right? So what does this iris do? It controls the light that is entering the pupil. And what does the pupil do? Pupil determines the amount of light entering into the eye. Okay, so let's see how they work together. Okay, let's understand the function of this iris. Now this iris, it contains two sets of smooth muscles. Okay, so these two smooth muscles are sphincter and dilator. So what do these muscles do? Now these muscles, they will regulate the amount of light, right, entering into the eyeball. How? By varying the size of the pupil. मतलब pupil को छोटा करेंगे या तो बड़ा करेंगे. कौन करेगा बड़ा? Who will regulate the size of the pupil? These two muscles will regulate the size of the pupil, right? So let's see how. Now the sphincter muscles, you know, they are arranged in rings. Okay, they are arranged in rings like this. So when they will contract, they will make the pupil smaller in size. Okay, so when they contract, what happens to the pupil? It becomes smaller in size. And when this contraction will happen? This contraction happens in the bright light. Okay, so when there is bright light, that means there is too much of light, this sphincter muscles will contract and the pupil will become smaller. Why it is doing it so? Because when the pupil becomes smaller, the amount of light that will enter into the eye will be less. And that is how it is protecting the eye. Right? So, what will happen in the dim light? Exactly opposite, right? These dilated muscles are the radial muscles, okay, like this. So actually on top of this only you will have the radiator muscles. So these radiator muscles, what they do, they are arranged in a radial manner. So they will contract in when there is dim light. Okay, so they will contract when there is dim light, and that will make the pupil size bigger. So basically exactly opposite. So when the pupil size becomes bigger, or it widens up, what happens? It will allow more light to enter in, so that you can see clearly even in dim light, right? So iris, therefore, by regulating the size of the pupil, will allow the light to pass through only the center of the lens. So when the pupil size is regulated, what else is also affected? The light is always passing through the center of the lens. Why? Because that is the most optically effective part. Okay, so the most effective part is the center of the lens, right? Now what does this lens also does something, see, when you are looking at the nearby object, this lens will curve and thicken, okay? And when you are looking at the far object, this lens flattens up. So this reflex again causes the lens to change its shape, and this is nothing but the accommodation. So this is called the accommodation, or you can say the accommodation reflex. Okay, so you can see the pupil, the iris and the lens, they work and they regulate to, so that we can see clearly. Okay, so that is about the outermost layer, that is the fibrous layer, and the middle layer, that is the vascular layer. Okay, now we will move on to the inner layers of the eye. So what happens when the light enters right inside? So before we understand that part, we have to first understand what are the inner layers of the eye. So inner layer of the eyes, before we go right little inside, I will just talk about aqueous humor. Now vitreous humor you can clearly see over here in this picture, right? It is the portion that is being filled, the cavity, the entire big cavity over here behind the lens. So it is between the retina and the lens, that is the vitreous humor. Okay, and this vitreous humor is a transparent gel. Okay, it is a transparent gel, and that is filled right in the big cavity over there between this retina and the lens. Now what is aqueous humor? Let me show you another picture. Yeah, so this is the aqueous humor over here. Okay, so you can clearly see over here, this part is the cornea, right? This is your lens. So between the cornea and the lens, you have this liquid that is filled over here, that is aqueous chamber. Okay, so this is the aqueous chamber, and it is a thin watery fluid, and that thin watery fluid is nothing but aqueous humor. So it is thin watery fluid. Okay, the blue color region that you can see. Right? Okay, we now go on to the next part of the inner layer of the eye, that is the retina. Okay, now before I talk about the retina, let me talk about the optic nerve. Okay, so you can see this is the optic nerve. Now this optic nerve, it is leaving the retina. Okay, it is leaving the eye. So it is consisting of sensory neurons. So what does optic nerve consist of? Sensory neurons. Okay, and it will leave the eye from the back side. Okay, and this point of departure of this optic nerve, where it is going to leave from the eyeball, at this point, you know, it does not have any rods or cones. Okay, why? Because we know that retina has what? It has the different layers, right? And these are the different photoreceptors. It has the visual cells, the rod cells and the cone cells. Yes, we are familiar with these rods and cones. So the point where this optic nerve will leave the eyeball, that point these rods and cones are absent, and this point produces an optic disc. So here you can see, or it is called as the blind spot. Why blind spot? Now you can understand, because there is no rods and cones, and rods and cones are responsible for the vision, right? Those are the main photoreceptor cells, correct? So at this point you do not have any rods or cones, and that's why it's called as the optic disc, the blind spot. Okay, now posterior pole of the eye, you can see that lateral to the blind spot, there is the yellowish pigmented spot that is called as the macula. Okay, so posterior means just behind this blind spot, that over here you have the yellowish pigmented spot called macula lutea. Okay, the full name is macula lutea, and it has a central pit inside it which is called as Fovea Centralis. Okay, so just let me write it here like this. Okay, it is Fovea Centralis. So this macula lutea has a central pit which is called as Fovea Centralis. Now this Fovea Centralis is actually a thinned out portion of the retina. Okay, and here only the cones are densely packed. So here you will find only cones which are densely packed over here, and this is the point therefore where the visual acuity is the greatest. Okay, so visual acuity, what do you mean by this? Visual acuity means the maximum resolution, the fine image that you can get over here is at the Fovea Centralis, right? Now this Fovea Centralis is a yellowish kind of spot, and it is comprising of xanthophyll. Okay, and cones, they also contain certain pigment that is called as iodopsin, and it corresponds to this green color. It also has two other pigments, that is porphyrosin and synopsin, that corresponds to red and blue color respectively. Okay, so here there are these other different three pigments of cones. Okay, iodopsin, porphyrosin and synopsin. This corresponds to the green color, this corresponds to the red color, and this corresponds for the blue color. And rods are basically for the twilight vision. Okay, so let me write it here. That is light and dark vision. It is also called as scotopic vision. Okay. So rods are basically for light and dark shades. Okay, it's black and white also you can say, whereas cones are responsible for colored region.